Our scripture this morning is from the book of John. Jesus is speaking. Don't let your hearts be troubled. You have faith in God, have faith in me as well. In God's house there are many dwelling places. Otherwise, how could I have told you that I was going to prepare a place for you? I am indeed going to prepare a place for you, and then I will come back to take you with me, that where I am, there you may be as well. You know the way that leads to where I am going. Thomas replied, but we don't know where we are going. How can we know the way? Jesus told him, I myself am the way. I am the truth, and I am life. No one comes to God but through me. I won't leave you orphaned. I will come back to you. A little while now, and the world will see me no more, but you'll see me, because I live, and you live as well. On that day, you'll know that I am in God, and you are in me, and I am in you. The Comforter, the Holy Spirit, whom God will send in my name, will instruct you in everything, and she will remind you of all that I told you. Peace I leave with you. My peace I give to you. But the kind of peace I give you is not like the world's peace. Don't let your hearts be distressed. Don't be fearful. Ancient words for our modern day consideration.
Well, this is going to be kind of a hard sermon for me. Hopefully it won't be hard for you to listen to, but I have no idea how you're processing current events. All I know is all week long as I've talked to people, there's a sadness. But some people are going to be sad. Some people are restless to think, how do we go from here? And those are both legitimate feelings. I believe that the church was born out of times like this. The church was born being countercultural, was born standing up for the oppressed, but also was always a place of healing. And a place of understanding, even of the people that needed to be resisted. It was a struggle for justice that was motivated by love, not by hatred. And that can be really hard to tell what state you're in at a particular time. Because when you see devastation of people you love, it's hard to separate the feelings of trauma, the feelings of wanting to protect people you love, from your feelings for the people that feel dangerous. And sometimes are very, very dangerous. But I think this is Christianity 101. The reason we're going through the Sermon on the Mount is because I think Christianity abandoned the Sermon on the Mount a long time ago. It became a kind of juggernaut monstrosity that blessed the empires in which it found itself, that blessed the economic systems. The early church did not do that. The early church was prophetic. But it was a prophecy based on love. I believe that the early church was much richer than anything that happened after the church got to Europe. In Europe, it got sanitized. It moved into a philosophy. The early church, it was a life. And you saw an enormous complexity, enormous wisdom, enormous eclectic taste of listening to other religions, other philosophies, and learning from them. That was the early church. That's what I'm trying to get back to here. Because as much as the church wants to praise Jesus, you very seldom find a church that's based on the Sermon on the Mount. In other words, what Jesus taught. And it just kind of seems to me, if we're going to call ourselves followers of Jesus, he ought to at least get a vote and what's being done in his name. Through history, the church has been the worst enemy of many forms of human rights. So we need this to be a place of forgiveness, a place of transformation, and a place of resistance. And you'll find yourself emotionally able to do some of that sometimes and other parts of it other times. The early church was an expression of the mystery religions. And the mystery religions were initiating people into life. Baptism, communion, those were symbols of being invited into life. In the midst of its pain, in the midst of our fears, they were turning suffering into beauty. The rituals did that. And the symbols were ways of trying to understand our place in the universe. The early church would not have cared if you were Presbyterian. I don't think they would even care if you were a nominal Christian. It was whether you could love, whether you knew who you were in the grand scheme of things. How many people here love Thich Nhat Hanh? I bet most of us do. But when we think about the peace and the joy that Thich Nhat Hanh had, sometimes we try to capture that with retreats, with coffee table books. And it's really important to realize that his starting place for that kindness and that joy was the Vietnam War. The horrors of it. You can't separate that kind of beauty and that kind of peace from the difficulties of the real world. So when Jesus is going to say, I'm giving you peace, not as the world gives you peace, that's a very important line. The world, that word cosmos, it both meant the natural world, but also meant our beliefs about the world. We get the word cosmetics from this same root of cosmos. It's as the world appears to you, the world of your judgments, a world divided into friends and enemies, of wealth and poverty. It was in that world that Jesus said, I'm about to be executed by the empire. And I guess people could have been good patriots and put Rome first. Certainly don't want to get political here. But what Jesus said was, I will not leave you comfortless. He could not lift people out of their oppression. When he was born, Rome was in power. When he died, Rome was in power. And many of the same corrupt religious leaders were in charge. But the people he affected, the people that he loved and loved him back, were forever changed. And that's the gift we can look for. Not of having a Messiah come down to Washington. The world is never what we want it to be. It's never as clear. It's never good versus evil, and you never hit the finish line. If the election had gone different, it just would have been a different kind of problem. We would have hit the wall a little slower. But until we change our value system, we will be headed for that wall, no matter who's sitting in the chair of power. As long as things are more important than people, we were headed for this cliff. As long as your economic system is based on property, not human beings, not nature, not life, you're going to hit that wall anyway. The church was born out of times like this. The church is at its best at times like this in history. This is not the first crisis that's ever been. The church was born out of this kind of crisis, and the church has always flourished when it was oppressed. That may seem strange. I remember it's been a while since I've been on trial at the church. But I used to get in trouble all the time. And I'll never forget the first Easter where I'm sort of standing on the guillotine of the Presbyterian church, which is kind of pathetic. You know, that's kind of a pathetic persecution. But I realized I was understanding the Easter story for the first time in my life. It wasn't about an angry God. The cross is not about an angry God. God did not invent the cross, Rome invented the cross. And so when the early church took up the cross, it was a political statement. It was a political statement. Jesus died because he would not be less than human in an empire that killed you for that. Rome didn't care what you believed. But somebody who said, share everything, that you are the light of the world, that nobody is meant to be a slave of anyone else. That message was a threat to the powers that be, and it still is. So we're going to look at this verse, kind of walk around it a little bit, and think about how it would have been heard at the time. The cross, I've never been that crazy about the cross. But when you think about coming years, there may be some comfort there. That we don't need to be afraid of the powers that be. And we certainly don't need to leave our ethics behind in order to serve the powers that be. When people lifted up the cross, it was in defiance of bullying, of judgment, of bad leaders, both religious and political and military. The cross, I think, symbolizes most profoundly, to begin with, just human suffering. The fact that it hurts to be fully human. In Greek culture, they had the story of the guy that was chained to the rock, and the eagles would come torture him. Prometheus, that's it. Very good. Does anybody know what the word Prometheus means? Foresight in Greek. It's the human condition to be born and realize you're going to die. And to be tortured by foresight. And to realize the person you're loving and embracing is going to die. That you are a part of a river of change. When Jesus talked about the kingdom, it wasn't a place. It wasn't mansions in the sky. It was a river that runs through everything. Kingdom is a synonym for the will of God. If you don't believe in God, that's not a problem. It's the creative principle of things. It's the way of life, the way of nature that's written inside you. So in our story, Thomas represents, in the mystery religions anyway, the false self that tries to figure everything out. In this understanding, the fall of humankind takes place when we become conscious. Because all of a sudden we don't realize that we are nature. We think we're watching it from the outside. It's dualism that we're falling into. Thomas in Aramaic means twin. That's translated in the Greek as twin. So as Jesus is talking to Thomas, Jesus represents the foundation of life. When he says, I am, that's the ground of your own being talking. And Thomas and each of the disciples represents a human foolishness that can't grasp that. How foolish it is to try to understand life with just our minds. Try to turn it into a system, into a philosophy, into a religion. So it's Thomas the twin looks at Jesus and hears Jesus say this calling. And the mind can't follow. Dualism can't follow where it's being called. When we try to live on the surface of life, and I think that's where we as Americans have been for a long time, skimming along the surface of life with no real roots. A democracy does not live by compromises alone. If you don't have the principles of a democracy, it's going to crack apart. If you don't bind yourself to the social contract, it's going to crack apart. So Jesus is calling Thomas deeper than he's comfortable going. Have you ever read that when there's a hurricane in the ocean, the great whales and the great fish go deep? And there's always a piece deeper from that surface. When the I Am speaks, that's your fountain, your foundation. The heavenly parent is a symbol of your own source. And you are an offspring. That's what it means to be the son or daughter, offspring of God. And what happens is your false self begins to die from the pain, and you go deeper to find your real self. Have you ever had a situation where fear or pain caught you, and because you loved somebody more than you were afraid, you found a wisdom and a courage that was always there? When Jesus says to Thomas, "You know the way," see, that's mystery religion stuff. How can he possibly know the way unless it's written inside of him? Jesus hadn't said anything about that. To follow Jesus means to discover yourself, your true self, and to blossom from that. If this sounds alien to you, and I'm sure it does, I want to invite you to go on your computer and look up Gospel of Thomas. Find a PDF. That was the kind of Christianity that existed much in the early church. And it was symbolic, and it was universalistic, and it was talking about life, not heaven. And it wasn't talking about salvation in the sense of rescue. It was awakening, much closer to enlightenment. So the first thing, remember Buddha saying life is suffering. The cross says that to start with too. To realize that your suffering is not, you've not been picked out for punishment. It hurts. It hurts to be a human being sometimes, and it hurts to love. So the first thing that the cross is calling us to is to opening our hearts in the face of pain. Not to expect to have a life without pain. But when we can, and we can't always do it, but when we can, to open our hearts in the midst of that. And the second is to realize that love transforms pain into beauty. Now, that doesn't make the pain worth it. You wouldn't choose pain under any same circumstances. But if you think about Thich Nhat Hanh, if you think about Viktor Frankl, if you think about your heroes in life, they probably didn't get there in comfort. They went where we don't want to go and transformed it. I would not choose for our nation to go down the path we've chosen. I'm not going to even mention any of the bad examples because you already know all that. But the church was born for this. We can be communities of transformation where we learn what the mystics of old knew, the meditation, that if you can get your mind still, you will feel your connections to the web of life. You don't have to believe what some preacher says. It's written in you. It's the wisdom that holds you together. Let me read just a couple of verses from the Gospel of Thomas. I know this is a little long, but I think it's important. These are a couple of passages that are very similar to John. The Gospel of Thomas is dated, depending on people, whether people are conservative or liberal. Conservatives say maybe 250 years after the birth. But there are other scholars that say it may have been like as little as 30 years after Jesus, 60, something like that. Now, if that's true, it's older than John. And when I read the Gospel of Thomas, when I graduated from college, and I heard these same metaphors, but they were richer and fuller, it made me think they're probably older. And when you read Gospel of Thomas and you read the Gospels that have survived, it kind of feels like they've dropped parts of the story out. Listen to this. Jesus said, "If those who lead you say to you, 'See, the kingdom is in the sky,' then the birds of the sky will precede you. If they say, 'God's kingdom is in the sea,' then the fish will precede you. Rather, the kingdom is inside you, and it is around you. When you come to know yourselves, then you will become known. You will realize that it is you who are the children of the living source." Another verse. Jesus said, "If they say to you, 'Where have you come from?' say to them, 'We have come from the light, from the place where the light came into being by itself.'" Think about modern astronomy. The ancients somehow figured out we come from the stars. If we can remember that at times like this, maybe we can trust that there's a depth within us of peace and joy that are not on the line in this terrible time of crisis. That within us there is peace, there is joy. We just have to go deeper, and we have to let go of superficial concerns and realize the honor of being a human being in the cosmos. Jesus says he doesn't give the way the world gives peace. So when you look at your heroes, they probably didn't live in what you would call peace, but they had peace. And I think that's what we need right now. So I've talked about the cross. It's a symbol of the just inherent pain of being human and caring. It's also a place of transformation where our pain can become something beautiful. And then finally, it's a reminder that when we do justice, we do so as wounded healers. We're not that different than the people that are frustrating us right now. We're the same species. If you watched Fox News every day, you'd probably be doing the same stuff. Rich people were really smart. They bought up the presses. They bought up the news stations and channeled misinformation to the world. And there are people acting on that. But they are your human family. The cross is a reminder. It's like a veteran who has a scar, that the courage came through pain. It's the stretch marks of somebody who's given birth, to realize that as happy as one may be with the love they have for their children, there was a pain involved. But the pain brought beauty to the world. We will need to be a center of transformation. We're also going to need to be a center of resistance. You can't say you're an inclusive church if there are people who want to hurt the people in your community and you don't stand with them. The cross was a threat to anybody that would stand up for other people. And yet the early church lifted that up proudly. Not because of anything that had to do with religion or theology. They realized that love is stronger than the fear and the hatred they were given. When I first started doing activism, it really bothered me that so many people I ticked them off. I didn't mean to, but it's like, just really push people's buttons. But at a point I realized if you stand up for the unpopular, you're going to be unpopular. Right? If you stand up for people being oppressed, the people doing the oppression aren't going to be particularly fond of you. There's a saying in Taoism, Tao means the way, the path. If foolish people don't laugh at you, you're probably not on the path. So if you're getting attacked by trolls, right? And one of the ways you always know you've said something original is when all the parrots come and peck on you. This is a very difficult time. And you need to process it in your own way at your own speed. It may be too early to think of hope, but it's helpful to remember what healing will look like someday. And what Jesus is saying is that in spite of the pain, the misery, he was able to look out and say, they don't know what they're doing. Right? That didn't take away the evil of it, but they were being goobers, and Jesus remembered that he had been that way too. What's that? Back pocket. Did I put something in there? Well, I think I may put it here. No, money? Does anybody want? That's better than my sermon. So, yeah, but I think these are from last week. So, we'll have a moment of silence into that last I was going to read the quote that Robert Reich did about hope. That there are people who don't want you to live your life. Not because they're bad or evil. They're afraid, and they don't know what to do if they don't control people. Jesus said, "You are the light of the world." Just being a loving, caring person threatens. Oh, thank you. Prayer works. Precious lambs of God. Thank you. Yeah, this will be better than my filling in space. We're almost done. Okay. This is Robert Reich. I'm going to skip the first part because it's a little judgmental of our friends who are. Never mind, I won't. The fact that we cannot save everything does not mean that we cannot save anything. And everything we can save is worth saving. You may need to grieve or scream or take time off, but you have a role no matter what. And right now, good friends and good principles are worth gathering in. Remember what you love. Remember what loves you. Remember in this tide of hate what love is. The pain you feel is because of what you love. Or like Jesus said, I will not leave you comfortless. Not like the world gives do I give you peace. Let not your heart be troubled, neither let it be afraid. We'll take a moment now for you to gather your own thoughts.